Well, the coal industry now on the defensive against the Obama administration as it tries to cut emissions and tighten regulations. And the White House might be looking to go a step further now with a new plan, a separate plan to potentially cut carbon dioxide emissions from existing power plants. Is the president making the right move, or are we talking trouble with a capital T? Joining us now to discuss it, political strategist Chuck Rocha, Thomas Basile. Gentlemen, good to see you. Chuck, let me begin with you. Is the president trying to put the coal industry out of business?
The president ran on this. The president wants to cut emissions. He's been talking about global warming. He's been talking about climate change since he got into office. Now, that being said, the environmental community are huge backers of this president. And this president is trying to deliver for the environmental community and for the men and women out there who love clean water and clean air. But also, I would keep in mind that drilling permits have doubled under President Obama, and he has had an all-the-above approach on his other energy policies.
Cutting emissions isn't free. I mean, it comes at a cost. And, you know, Tom, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars imposed on these power plants that then have no alternative. They can't absorb it all. They have to pass it on to consumers. Now you're hurting consumers.
Well, the president loves to talk about, like Chuck says, about the environment. What he doesn't like to talk about are jobs. And he doesn't like to talk about the economic impact of these rules. The CO2 rule and the mercury rule together would be the most expensive federal regulation in history. We're talking $3.4 trillion estimated pulled out of this economy between now and 2030.
What about health and safety concerns? Maybe you got to spend the money to save lives.
Well, look, there are already onerous regulations on these power plants to the point where a lot of the power producers, of course, they're doing one of two things. They're either closing down these coal-fired power plants, or they're passing it along in the form of rate hikes to the consumer. Either way, it's killing jobs and it's killing the American taxpayer.
Yeah. You know, Chuck, I did some digging on this because I wrote a column about EPA regulations, and what I found is that when Congress passed all of these environmental laws, there was a caveat, a proviso, and it said basically the law must always weigh both the human and the economic impact. A regulatory agency doesn't have unfettered power. It has to weigh the economic impact. Is the EPA failing to weigh that?
Well, if they're not taking that into consideration, they are failing. I think that there has to be a middle ground on this, and I think that it's good to limit mercury. I think it's good to limit CO2, but there is always going to be a cost when technology changes and the environment around job changes. I worked in that factory in East Texas that made tires, and we changed all the time to meet regulations, so we had a safe environment, but we also kept the jobs there, and we played it in hand. I don't think it's an absolute on either side.
Yeah. You know, there's a new case going before the U.S. Supreme Court. It'll be decided likely next June. And it's going to be an important case. It'll set the limits on the Environmental Protection Agency. And look, they've won most of the cases that have been brought against him, haven't they?
Well, in the recent months, they've had some significant victories, but they're not doing exactly what you're talking about, and that is looking at the economic impact. And that will be one of the issues that will be raised in the Supreme Court case, because on one hand, the EPA says that it could cost $90 billion. On the other hand, they say it'll save $90 billion. They never talk about jobs. They never talk about ancillary economic impact or the impact on the ratepayers of these electric utilities.
Yeah. Thomas Basile, Chuck Rocha, good to see you guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
And for the latest on this developing story, check out the politics page on foxnews.com. I'm Greg Jarrett. Thanks for watching.